Hello, everybody. Thank you all for tuning in to today's Coffee with Survivor. We're very excited to have Elizabeth Vrato here today to talk about her grandfather's story. Liz, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sarah. Good morning. And thank you to the Holocaust Museum of Illinois for having me here. I'm honored that I even have content that is worthy to share with an audience like this and with an institution like this. What I've done is I have a PowerPoint up here, and I'll just kind of let the pictures drive the story. And I have some notes in front of me also, and we'll see how it goes. We'll sip our coffee, and I'll try to do justice to my grandfather's story here. As an overview of how I'm going to do this, I thought let's just talk about Albania in World War II for a minute or two, and then what did Kadri Sacrany do during the war? That's my grandfather. And then what happened to Kadri Sacrany after the war? Also, why are we just hearing this story now? And why does it matter? And let's dig in. Here's a map. Albania is, in short, across the heel of the boot of Italy. So here's Italy, here's the boot, here's the heel, and across the heel of the boot is Albania with its capital, Tirana. Let's get a further perspective and see during World War II, we talk about Germany an awful lot. So how far is Albania from Germany? That's the larger Northern and Western Europe view, and where Jewish refugees would have come from to Albania: Poland, Germany, Hungary, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Greece, into Albania. And of note is that Austria is right here in the middle. And we'll talk about Austria a little bit also. A little more perspective is, where is Albania in relation to Israel? So now here we are across the heel of the boot. That's Albania. And so you come down the Adriatic and you'd be making a left and to the Mediterranean Sea, and here you are with Israel. So they're just coastal countries in the Mediterranean region. Our story is going to center on Berat, Albania. There's a lovely photo of it. And Berat is today a protected UNESCO site because of a medieval fort that it has that hasn't been monetized and has been so well preserved. It's a beautiful city and region. And there are other photos that do this whole thing more justice, of the houses in rows up the hill, and people will call it a town of 1,000 windows, that kind of thing. Now let's talk about the family that my grandfather came from, because I think that is also part of the setting here, and very much infuses what he did and what he felt able to do. His father is a signer of the Declaration of Independence of Albania from the Ottoman Empire. His father is Kadri Sacrany, and as you can see here, he plays with the big H, like John Hancock or something. And he was one of the 6 people who got together and sent a telegram to the Turkish government and said, we're leaving. And then they wrote the declaration. They got together a group of 40-something men to sign. And so Albania became an independent, democratic, European country, November 28th, 1912. And my grandfather's father was there. His brother, Haradine's brother, that is, became the first Ministry of Finance for the country and financed the new country from the family's assets, so that the country could start to get recognition from other European countries and set up agencies and do all the things that countries need to do in order to do their work in the world. This is an old photograph that I've just come across recently in the last couple of years. And there's a lot here that's just in the last couple of years, and we'll get to that and then why that is. This was an article photograph my uncle found on the internet. It appears to have been from an Italian magazine. And in Italian, it says something like, the casa, the founder, the house of the founder of the state of Albania, Haradine Bey Sacrany. And there's their house with a dog and a car and some horses. And so this is the family that my grandfather was born into. And before a couple years ago, when I was visiting Albania, I was just in a bookstore downtown by the center square there, and I found a book about the family in a bookstore, written all in Albanian. I couldn't read it, but a family friend read it and told me that it said the Sacrany family of the Sacran region had educated people of Albania for 100 years with opening schools, and had a mission to improve the lives of Albanians, and had a foundation that helped people during the Spanish flu and helped needy people. And that is the family my grandfather was born into. So now we'll meet my grandfather. His name's Kadri. So this is Kadri Sacrany. And this is him at about 18 years old. So the year would be maybe 1921. He was born in 1903. He's in his graduation from St. Teresian Military Academy in Austria here. And St. Teresians is like that Sandinghurst sort of a thing, like a prestigious military school that families in Europe sent their sons to in order to grow up to have lives of public service and to serve in the military. And that's what my grandfather did. Most notably, perhaps for this conversation, is that in addition to becoming a refined military officer in the style of all the other European countries, he became fluent in German. And that is going to help when he's going to start lying to Nazis very capably. Here he is in Berat. He's the fellow in the center here. Here he is in Berat with his fellow soldiers. And this is 1944. And he was the commandant of Berat, so the general of the Berat city and region for the Albanian government. And Albania had been occupied by the Italians. And so my grandfather acted as the point person, so to speak, for the Albanian government in Berat, helping with the logistics and management of the civilians versus the soldiers, his soldiers and the occupying soldiers. And Albania never became fascist or Nazi, and never fought with the fascists or the Nazis like some other countries had soldiers who did that. They managed to always be independent and occupied, to the extent there is such a thing. But I not independent, but we'd say occupied, simply they didn't fight with the occupying soldiers. And so now we get to the crux of our talk, and that is in September of 1943, the Nazis are now taking over and the Italians are leaving. When the Italian soldiers were leaving, the Nazis wanted them all to be turned over. And my grandfather and his fellow soldiers in Berat helped to establish a safe passage for the Italian soldiers to leave and leave safely and go home. And a name that could come up an awful lot, but I'll try not to say it too much, but it's under a lot of what I'm saying, is Dr. Gazman Kaplani, the chair of the first Albanian Studies program in the country, and it's at DePaul University, has helped me and versed me in a lot of Albanian history pertaining to World War II and otherwise, but particularly World War II. And he told me that there's simply not another instance that can be identified in World War II where those who had been the captives helped their captors. But my grandfather and his men helped 7,500 Italian soldiers leave Albania safely rather than be turned over to the Nazis, which was the Nazi request. Furthermore, Albania had been a safe haven for Jews during the Holocaust for a few years now. While the country was occupied by the Italians were not seeking to round up Jews, but the Jews were still there in hiding from Northern and Eastern Europe pursuits of Jewish people. The Jewish people in Berat were integrated into the community. They worked in bakeries and hotels. They lived in people's attics and basements, and they also lived amongst the family of particular families and would take their names. When they first came to the checkpoints to come into Berat, they would be put into caves so that they could hide until fake ID was prepared for them and how they were going to live their lives in Berat. So that was going on for a while. And in fact, you could even go back to 1939. King Zog of Albania had issued a whole bunch of visas to Jews seeking to come to Albania and wanted Albania to be a safe haven from the Nazi party. So the tradition of being open-hearted, of not embracing anti-Semitism, was in the country. It was acted upon by the leaders. And that's what this letter is going to show us right here. I have some translation notes, and I couldn't begin to try to do it without them. So bear with me a second as I find this letter is from Commandant Kadri Sacrany, running from the National Front of Albania in September 1943. And in part, he says, "We need to urgently transport a big number of people from Berat. I am talking about the Jews who are here now in the hundreds. If they are found, they will all be put under the bullet. You never know what might happen to them, and I cannot trust anyone. Even if I hide them with documents in our families, I don't know how the word might come out. I may then put all of Berat under the bullet. They should not be allowed to fall into the hands of the Nazi army that is on its way here. We know what the Nazis will do to them. Please send me your courier immediately, Commandant Kadri Sacrany." And we'll tell the story first of what all he did, and then we talk about how I found this out and why it's just now. But this letter shows planning. This letter shows knowledge of the bad acts of the Nazis in a way that I know that learning in school is changing now. The teachings are changing, but I remember being taught that people didn't know what was going on with concentration camps until they were liberated some 77 years ago now. And so is he referring to concentration camps? We don't know that, but we can take the language literally and say that they will all be put under the bullet. That could at least be referring to the mass executions of Jews that happened throughout Eastern and Central Europe. And he knows that he's been saving their lives, and he's committing to wanting to continue to do that. And this act of bravery, as it plays out, is absolutely remarkable. I'll just check my notes of where to click into on what it is that we find on him. There's the saving of about 600 Jews in Berat. It is authenticated and verified at the Solomon Museum in Berat. And what the Solomon Museum tells us is that Kadri Sacrany was important to the sheltering and saving the lives of 600 Jews during the Holocaust, that he never turned over a single name to the Nazi officers who questioned him regularly, and that he also sheltered Jews in his own home. And any one of those things would have brought about his death. So everything he did he did under penalty of death, and he did it anyway. There's an example that I thought of recently that I thought we could discuss and play it out a little bit. And that is, there's a movie called The Albanian Code. It's a documentary that came out in 2018. It was filmed in 2017. And the dates are important because it was filmed in 2017. It came out in 2018. The Solomon Museum, the Jewish History Museum in Berat, opened the year that the movie came out. So it opened in 2018. It almost closed in 2019, then reopened and was taken over by the Tosca Foundation in a larger space, and it's there now. The premise of the Albanian Code movie is that there's a little girl named Annie at 6 years old who's sheltered in Berat, and then her family emigrates to Israel after the war, as many of the Jews who were liberated at the end of the war moved to Israel. And so she grows up in Israel, and her family can't keep in touch with the family that sheltered them. And that's because of the Iron Curtain. When the war's over, that's what happens to Albania, is they cut off ties with Western Europe, with Israel, with the US. And so her mother always says to her, if you can thank them, if you can ever thank them, do it. And so Annie comes back to Berat with a documentary filmmaker, and she walks around Berat just thanking people. And they talk about the commandant a few times without saying my grandfather's name. But there's this, there's kind of like this conceit in the documentary that you just don't know who to thank. You just don't know who did what. And then, ironically enough, the Solomon Museum opens the next year and lays all this out, and it should be an important epilogue to the movie. But in the movie's trailer, and I'll just read it for a sec because it's important. In the movie's trailer, they say that Berat was the hub of where Jewish refugees were being hidden in Albania, and the largest number of refugees were in Berat. When the Nazis arrived, they ordered the Albanians to gather Jews in the city square the next morning. The next morning, the square was empty. So you would see that in a trailer and think, well, that's dramatic. But now, if you think about it for a moment, what does that really mean? It means that Kadri Sacrany, after writing this letter, made the commitment to himself and to the community and to the Jewish people who were being sheltered, that he was going to continue to do it. And so that morning, the city square was empty. And who would have been the one who had to say to the Nazi officers, there are no Jews here. I have no list to give you. Look somewhere else, so to speak. It would have been the commandant, who was the representative of the Albanian government, who was the leader in charge of Berat and the surrounding region. So in his doing that, he started a new phase and a new commitment to the saving of these Jewish people, because every day now, in a very close proximity with Nazi officers, he was telling the officers that there are none, and never turning over a name. And I was reflecting on that even more. How did he manage that? And certainly that he spoke German was a part of it. And then I think that he went to the St. Teresians Military Academy, must have also been part of it. And I rewatched Schindler's List lately. I've been watching a lot of World War II movies in the last couple of years doing this research. And I know that, excuse me, coffee break, right? I know that there are issues with, the Schindler character, the Schindler person, and the movie and all of that. But there was a nugget I got out of it, which was the characters presented in the movie. Oskar Schindler, he's a German industrialist. He's a member of the Nazi Party. He comes to Poland to get government contracts and make a fortune while the Nazis are there. And he takes Jewish labor because it's free, as opposed to Polish labor, which would cost something. And then he comes to learn what the fate is of the Jewish people. And he commits to saving their lives by having them be his employees and making his list of employees more and more. But the Schindler character all along is kind of a glad hander with these Nazi officers. First, it's just for him to make money, and then it's so that he can continue to bribe them and save lives. And so he'll send them baskets with cigars and vodka in it, and they go and have cabaret nights together as part of this. And it just got me to thinking, my grandfather, standing tall in his uniform in Berat and speaking German and telling the officers that he was from St. Teresian's Academy, must have given them some bit of comfort that they were dealing with someone who they knew, that, and he could likewise, he could know how they think, know what they expect, know their behaviors. Maybe they talked about Austria and Vienna and books and culture and music. And so that he was able to communicate with them in this way would make up a space for him to be able to protect the people of Berat, as well as the visitors there, the refugees who were being sheltered. And he would learn, it's in the Solomon Museum, he would learn, or just, kind of pick up when and where the Nazis were going to do a sweep in the city or in the area, looking for Jews. And he would let his soldiers know so that they could let the citizenry know, so that the people who were sheltered could move and take the initiative and remain sheltered. And so that was one of the advantages of his education and his background. Let me just see for a moment where we are. I think let's advance a slide and move to this story, which is more Holocaust and World War II heroism. I think I'll just read it out, and that'll give us the gist of it. The bearer of this letter, Mr. Kadri Sacrany, has asked this office to verify the assistance given to him in the care, feeding, and evacuation of 3 American Army nurses stranded in enemy-occupied Albania after a crash landing in November 1943. Reports of American officers from this organization indicate that Mr. Sacrany directly maintained the safety and well-being of the nurses during a period when they were isolated in a home located near a German garrison in the city of Berat. In March 1944, after obtaining the necessary travel documents, Mr. Sacrany disguised the party as peasants and arranged their transportation by vehicle through 2 German guard blocks to a point near the coast of Albania, where they were turned over to an officer of this unit, returned back to the Allies. So there was a medic plane, about 30 people. They crashed in Nazi-occupied Albania. They were all together for a while. The 27 stuck together. 3 of the women became separated. They were picked up by soldiers of my grandfather. My grandfather took them into his care and custody. And let's see, just this past week, I was given this photograph by a historian in Kentucky named Caroline Miller, who has written the memoir of one of the nurses, whose name is Wilma Lydle, L-Y-D-L-E. And as you can see, the photograph says Commandant of Berat. And then, it's on. I want that to go down, right? Hold on. Here we are. On the back, it's so old-fashioned. Someone wrote, I know this wasn't my grandfather's writing because he didn't speak English. It's also not what his writing looks like, but he gave them his photo and said, "Lest you forget me," and Berat. Berat from November 1943 to March 1944. And look at this, he gave her a patch from his uniform. It's something so, World War II-y about that, of here, have my photo and my patch, and thank you. We've had this journey together. Here's the 3 nurses who he sheltered. And then the back of, he also had 3 individual photos of them, and he gave them all, you can see here, this is his last name, Cakrani. He gave them all his last name in their fake papers. And So it looks like she's something like Marusha Sacrany, rather, sorry, Americanized as we say Cochran. This whole thing was written about in a book. This is one of the nurses. Jensen is another memoir. So you have the Caroline Miller memoir of Nurse Lytle, then you have Agnes Jensen, and then there's this writer, Kate Lineberry. She also wrote a book about it. She worked at the Smithsonian, and some of the artifacts are there, and she became fascinated with the story, and so she just wrote this book about it, and she contacted my family, and contacted some people in Albania, even who were alive at the time and part of it. And my mom and I went and met the little boy who lived in the house where they were sheltered, the three nurses, and he remembered. I have it on my old iPhone video. He told my mom he remembered my grandfather coming in at night with a long sweeping cape and holding books and food, and that his parents would hush him and say, "Don't tell anyone that this man was here," and taking care of the nurses and tending to them. And then when communism came to Albania, the little boy's father was taken off to prison for having helped Kadri Sacrany hide the nurses. And he and his mother went to visit his dad and baked his father's favorite food. They went to the prison and were told he wasn't available. And his father had been killed as soon as he got there, is what they learned later. But at the time, he thought they were visiting his dad. And so the point is, there were serious life-threatening consequences to all of this heroism, the hiding of American nurses, the sheltering of Jewish refugees, the helping of Italian soldiers out of the border. And there's one more we'll talk about real quick, but here's my grandfather in Berat, 1944. And significantly, I think, and I didn't realize this till recently, behind him is a portrait of Skanderbe on a horse. And Skanderbe was a famous warrior who held back the Ottoman Empire from Albania for years and years, I guess for decades, until he couldn't. And then to have sitting in front of that, my grandfather, whose family helped to found the independent Albanian state. So the last bit of World War II heroism I wanted to discuss is the codices of Berat. They're Gnostic Gospels from the 6th century. And there's 3 books. And my grandfather and his men dug 3 holes and hid them in the forest. And he was questioned about it. It's in a military journal and in an article that Dr. Cakrani was able to read and discuss with me. So he was interrogated vigorously in a barn, and he wrote that the Nazi officers were so angry that he actually thought he was going to be killed that day and not leave the meeting. And it was part of the cultural looting that the Nazis did everywhere they went. And the counter of that was that Monuments Men movie where the team goes around and tries to recapture the treasures of Europe before the Nazis will destroy them. All right, let's talk about what happens. Whoa, hold on a second. I want that. That, okay. Yeah, let's stay here. Okay, so now let's talk about what happens when the war is over. So Albania was liberated from the Nazis in October 1944. And so the Jewish refugees were free to live their lives, not under the fear of the Nazi army again. Now then, communism is taking over Albania, and my grandfather is against it. He wants an independent, democratic Albania. My aunt remembers a couple stories from the families fleeing from Albania at that time. One is she remembers she was about maybe 14, 15 at the time, and she remembers overhearing my grandfather on the phone with one of the British officers who ultimately helped the family escape. And my grandfather said to him, I need 2 boats, either empty or full. And so the idea was, I need support. We've got to fight these guys, or I've got to get out of here with the folks who are working with me. And what happened is the British Army actually did withdraw from Albania, and in whatever negotiations all happened in those big 3 negotiations after World War II, Albania is allowed with 7 countries to go behind the Iron Curtain. My grandfather had to flee as he was a personal enemy of the rising dictator, Enver Hoxha. He was like number 7 on the enemy list or something like that. There's documents like that that float around. And my aunt remembers my grandfather saying to my grandmother, I have to leave. They're coming for me. This will be over in 2 weeks and I'll be back. And nobody wants you. And you just stay here. And British intelligence had been telling him at the time, this kerfuffle of communism, it will be over soon. Just go to Italy and wait it out. My grandmother refused to be left behind with the 2 kids, and she was pregnant. And my grandfather said, I'm gonna be food for the fish tonight. They're putting us in a leaky boat. And she said, I will come be food with the fish tonight too. And so for that reason, my family stayed together and got to America ultimately. And if it hadn't been for her being pushy about it, my family would have been separated by the Iron Curtain, as so many others were. So my grandfather went to Italy, and he was in a displaced persons camp with his wife and kids, and they waited. And communism was more than a kerfuffle. And his uncle was hung at the age of 84 in a town square, and his brother as well. His 2 other brothers were put into manual labor prisons and worked till they died. And then this is his sister here. Her name is Sahad, and they called her Shega, which is the Albanian word for pomegranate. That was her nickname, Shega. And I just thought she would be a good photo for us to rest on while we talk about what happened with the family. If you were plotting out a movie here, it's called the Midpoint Flip. And Midpoint Flip is just where you pick on the protagonist so much and then their world is upside down. So in this Midpoint Flip, what we see is my grandfather, who had been helping refugees. Now he's the refugee. He was a person of power and influence. He has no more power and influence. He was a person of wealth. He has no more wealth. Enver Hoxha seized his property and assets. He was a person who was helping those who were being hunted, and now he's the one who's being hunted. He was helping people not to lose their lives, and now he's the one who's a target and ready to lose his life. And so there was a massacre on the adult men of my family. And my grandfather was in Italy watching and waiting. And 3.5 years later, they went to a refugee camp in Syria. And from there, they were able to get political asylum granted by President Truman to the United States in 1951. And again, to refer to my aunt's recollection, she said that Eleanor Roosevelt came to visit the Syrian refugee camp and held her hand and said, we know who you are and we're going to help you. And so my aunt actually named her daughter Eleanor, and that's my cousin Lola. So now the family's in Philadelphia, and my grandfather works with the CIA, FBI, for the remainder of his life from Philadelphia. He works with them in order to try to bring democracy back to Albania. And they weren't able to do it. And that's a whole other story. Trying to think if there's something else. Give me a second just to check notes. So we've gone over how he's a hero, the letter, how he coordinates with those Nazi officers. And it's that what's so interesting, and I reflect on it. I mean, I think about him every day now. I can't believe the choices he had to make, the stress he had to live under, the integrity, the character to reject the ideology of Nazism and anti-Semitism, which was rampant in Europe, and to find a way around it. It's unbelievable. Oh, you know what we should talk about is how did I learn this story? All right, let's talk about that. So that's my aunt, and I just thought, there she is again, that we should recognize her in the story. Here's God's helper. His name is Sammy Rousseau. He is a professor who was based in Berat, and after World War II, not after World War II, Albania under Nazism. Albania, after the Nazis left, Albania under communism. Enver Hoxha, you can't play Beatles music. You'll get arrested if you do. You can do it, you get arrested. So you'll get arrested if you listen to Beatles music, if you chew gum, if you're a man and you have hair longer than your collar. There's the practice of law is outlawed, no attorneys. People can't have private property, so even there are no cars except for the government. People just go around on foot, on bicycles, some buses, and this is part of the communist dictator way of doing things. Is you slow people down, you make it harder for them to get together or do things, and so Hoxha was really running an open air prison. And my grandfather, who was then in Philadelphia, could not speak out against him because Hoxha had so many people who were loved ones of my grandfather. And as Dr. Cakrani explained to me, it was like a hostage dynamic. Kind of, it's something like, you got away, but I have your sisters, your nieces and nephews, your fellow soldiers. And so if you do something publicly against me, I have them. And I met a cousin when I was there in February 2020 who said to me as much. He said, we were so grateful that your grandfather lived and made it to Philadelphia because that kept us alive. If he had been killed, all the rest of us would have been killed. But that he was alive kept us alive because Hoxha knew that your grandfather cared about us and wouldn't do anything to endanger us. Meanwhile, Hoxha had a war crimes trial against my grandfather with an empty chair. He sent letters to Stalin, Churchill, and Truman saying, why do you let him live free? Send him to me. And I called the Truman Library in Independence, Missouri, and asked them if President Truman ever responded to that letter. And they said, no, he did not. So the United States did its own vetting of Kadri Sacrany. In Albania, Hoxha ruined him, defamed him, took his fortune, took his position, his birthright, and tried to take his dignity and his reputation. And telegrams were sent to now declassified CIA files, and the telegrams will say, don't let Kadri Sacrany come to the United States. He was going to work with Mussolini and take over the Mussolini army and be its leader. Don't let Kadri Sacrany into the United States. He's a personal friend of Adolf Hitler. And the US government obviously did its own vetting and came to know the man for what he really was and did grant him a political asylum. All right, now let's meet Sammy Rousseau. So Sammy Rousseau is a professor in Berat who, when communism fell in Albania, so in the early 90s, 91 say, he starts to go around and record the oral history of Berat in World War II. People in Berat knew who did what, knew what they had done to save Jews, and Professor Rousseau, Simon, took hundreds of hours of testimony, gathered photographs, gathered letters, and it's quite a task because keep in mind, under Enver Hoxha, people destroyed evidence of sheltering Jews because they were so worried about that government knock at the door and to be affiliated with a state that the country had no relationship with, or with Kadri Sacrany and Berat, could be in trouble for your family. So this man pulled this all together and opened a labor of love museum called the Solomon Museum in Berat, Albania. It opened in 2018 and it almost closed in 2019 because it was private and he supported it with his own money. In 2019, it was taken over by the Tosca Foundation and moved and had a bigger, larger location. So now I'm going to end with how I learned this story. A friend of our family, Dan Shore, sent me an email saying, you know, there's a Jewish museum in Berat. I found it on Facebook. I looked at photos and I saw my grandfather's face on the wall. And so I showed it to my mom and said, what is this? And she said, I don't know, but you better find out. Now, in 2019, we had seen a copy of that letter in an internet article, but that's all we had. And that's not enough to know the full story. You know, maybe someone wrote that letter and then they didn't really do anything about it. And keep in mind, that's a decision that my grandfather always had. You know, that morning in the courtyard when they wanted to have all the Jews produced and no one was in that town square, he could have said to the local people, you know, we did it when the Italians were here. We did it for a while. We did our best, but boy, these Nazis are another ball of wax. I don't think we're going to be able to keep this up. And he knew where hundreds of Jews were. He could have turned over Jewish people at any time. He didn't even have to tell the people of Berat he was doing it. He could have just done it. And he never did it. And so that letter in itself is not enough for the story. What happened is I went to the Solomon Museum and I found this treasure trove of artifacts on the walls and in the archives. Now, Professor Vrato passed away in 2019 and his widow, Angela Vrato, is now the director. And I spent 4 days there and she walked me through each set of photos, each set of documents, told me stories. And I went to visit houses where Jewish people had been sheltered. I met people who could tell me more about it. And if the Solomon Museum didn't exist, I don't know where we would be with this story. But the fact that it exists, I think needs to just be more generally known and celebrated. The lead rabbi of Albania, Rabbi Finman, the rabbinate of Albania, he wants to make a specific Holocaust museum in Albania. And he said he's grappling with how to do this, because how do you have a Holocaust museum where nobody died? And so that's part of this wonderful legacy that Albania has. I came home from Albania. I met with Professor Cakrani, who the way I met him is I went to DePaul to see the documentary, The Albanian Code. And we reviewed what I had found and I wrote it up, and he posted it to the DePaul University Facebook page for Holocaust Awareness Day. I then put it on Twitter and tagged some museums, including Auschwitz, and the editor of the Auschwitz magazine called Memoria, and his name is Paul Sawicki. He DM'd me right away and said, we'd like to publish this article. So let's move down to that. Oh, there's me with Angelina. This is at the Solomon Museum in Berat. Now here we are with Memoria magazine. And I don't know if you can see, it's kind of faint. This is April 2020. So I'd just been there in February. And by April 2020, Auschwitz has been so gracious as to, you see down here, Kadri Sacrany, a happy story for Albanians, Jews, and the world. And this is the table of contents. It says it more clearly. That's why I put that there. And there's my mom and my uncle Liz. And so they were little kids who were traipsed all around and were refugees. And the way I set up the article, that our family didn't know this story, but now we do, was the start of the Auschwitz article. And I'd like to read that to you as we wrap up here. When my mother was a young girl in the 1950s in Philadelphia, all she wanted was to fit in as a new American. The tangible expression of fitting in was the hair bows worn by Debbie Reynolds. She wanted to have those hair bows and be more like Debbie Reynolds each and every day. She remembers focusing an inordinate amount of energy on Debbie Reynolds and the Hairbows. During this time, she remembers being a bit sassy to her father. When she looked at him, she saw an older, old world, foreigner, gentleman, as compared to some of the fathers of her new classmates at school in Philadelphia. Her father was Kadri Sacrany from Albania. One day, he held his lower back and told her, "I spent so many nights sleeping on big rocks in the mountains, my back will never recover." And here's the sass. She said, "Baba, if you did so many important things, why don't I know what they are? And why don't my friends know who you are?" And she recalls very vividly his response. He said, "I didn't do what I did for your friends. I did it because it was right, and history will know I was right. What was done will be in history books. You'll see." And I put that to show, see that bow right there? So that's my mom aspiring toward Debbie Reynolds. And she couldn't possibly appreciate, how could you ever tell a child what the family had just been through and what her father had done. And then keep in mind, he also kept quiet because of the hostage dynamic with Enver Hoxha. He kept those military secrets and such quiet. So after Auschwitz, I was lucky enough to discuss with a very accomplished friend who does a lot with Jewish communities in DC and around the world. And she connected me with Steve Rabinowitz of Blue Light Strategies. And he helped me with this op-ed piece, which was published by the Jerusalem Post, calling out my grandfather as an unknown Albanian hero of the Holocaust. Then I was referred to a wonderful strategic marketing company in Chicago called Page 2 Communications with Deborah Pickett, and she helped to connect with a Chicago lawyer and so get to American publications with this story. She also helped me to have an article published in Israel Hayam, a national Israeli newspaper. And then what I'm showing here is this is history fixed. This is history getting fixed. You'll see here the ambassador of Albania, the Albanian embassy in Israel, posted this article from Israel Hayam. Chicago writer discovers granddad hero during Holocaust. And here he is, and here's his story. And this is the first time in 75 years that the Albanian government is calling Kadri Sacrany a hero publicly. They're also calling him a Holocaust hero for the first time because wouldn't have done that publicly at the time. But during World War II, he was a hero of Albania. Then he wasn't. He was put up on war crimes and he was defamed. And now, thanks to the Solomon Museum and so many others, he's a hero again. And we can revise history. That's me and him. I was 7 or 8 years old, and that must be then the year he passed away. And I put a lot of this content up on a website, kadrisacrany.org. And this website was made by an American veteran. And he said he really connected with the story of the good that military can do in trying to help us have some world order. And so in conclusion, why does it all matter? It matters because democracy is frail. It matters because every life matters. It matters because in Holocaust storytelling, it's so important for the Jewish community to know the story of love. And I'll just go back to you with that, Sierra. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing this remarkable story. Are you up for a couple questions?
Sure.
All right. The first one that we got was, how did the Italian soldiers actually leave Albania?
My understanding is that they left mostly on foot, and that they needed a path to retreat so that they could move toward the, maybe back toward Bari, back toward the heel of the boot, instead of, again, my grandfather could have done something to try to what's the word, retain them, to keep them, to gather their names, to put them in jail, and wait for the Nazis to show up. And keep in mind, I don't have to tell you, but there were so many places in Europe when the Nazis showed up, the locals did turn over Jews to curry favor with the Nazis, and he could have done that, and he didn't.
You shared obviously a lot of places this story has been shared. Is there anywhere else, any other talks you've done, anything like that?
I was invited to an Atlanta Holocaust event last year, and it was online. And I've met with you, and I've met with the U.S. Holocaust Museum, and they have a what would you call it now, like a data room on my grandfather to gather information and make a page on him, and in order to commemorate him and include him in Holocaust heroes.
Brilliant. Another question we've got is, what was it like for you when you first discovered that letter?
It was surreal in that my mother verified that it was my grandfather's writing, and it was in an article written in Albanian that said that he had sheltered Jewish people, and my family didn't know about it. Now we knew about the American nurses, because when the family was in those displaced persons camps, they would get care packages from the 3 American nurses. They would send chocolate and stockings and coffee, and they kept in touch. But he didn't talk about the Italian soldiers. He didn't talk about the codices about Berat. He didn't talk about rescuing Jewish people. In fact, in talking with my aunt, when I would try to debrief her on family history, and knowing that it's the Holocaust, and knowing that Albania has the best record in Europe for sheltering Jewish people, I said to her, do you know anything? And she said, they were helping Jews. I heard some things. And I said, give me something, anything, a name. And she said, I'm sorry, I can't. So that letter was it. That was the tip of the iceberg, so to speak. And then the discovery of the Solomon Museum, and that this had all been pulled together, and all these priceless artifacts, and that so many of them were destroyed, regrettably, too.
And you also mentioned that you had been to Albania, I believe you said in 2020. What was that experience like, too, kind of following in his footsteps?
Yeah. So I saw that Facebook page, and I wanted to get there. And so it was just as coronavirus was starting. And I cleared with my supervisor that I was going to go for a week. And then I was thinking, oh, should I go spring break instead? I could take my daughter. Should I go in the summer instead? My mom can come. And it just got to be that I was either going to go that week, which is this week. That's right. That's why we set this then. This has been 2 years. So this is the 2-year anniversary of me going to the Solomon Museum, of meeting Angelina Vrato, and of getting this story. And so I went there, and I still didn't know what to possibly expect. And when I walked into this place, and there's these placards all around, and then like the first thing on the left as you're going in, it's my grandfather, and it basically says, like, if it weren't for him, this all would not have happened. And the Albanian romanticizing of Besa can use this substantiation now. The concept that Albanians are good-hearted is true, but there's other good-hearted people in Europe during the Holocaust, and there's other good-hearted people in the world. Besa was an unwritten code that was followed, and it involved hospitality, and it involved keeping your word. But the acts of the Albanians during World War II to protect Jews so far exceeded anything in Besa that it's almost insulting to Albanians to say that it was just Besa, because they did the same nitty-gritty things to shelter Jewish people that everybody else had to do all around Europe. And so it wasn't just some good-heartedness. It was, notice that letter with my grandfather. He's planning. He's saying, we have hundreds here. What are we going to do? We got to figure this out. They're coming. And it's not just good-heartedness. The moment in the courtyard, when you look at the Nazi officer and say, I don't have a list for you. There's no Jews here. That's leadership. That's integrity. That's work being done by real people. And if you look at, say, for instance, the numbers of Yad Vashem, if you look at Greece, which is right next door, versus Albania, Albania has fewer than 100 people in Yad Vashem. Greece has, I think, nearly 400. Well, part of that is Albania was behind the Iron Curtain for a while, and 50 years. And so there weren't applications being put in, and also evidence was destroyed. But now we know people who did real things with real courage, the same as anybody else. And it wasn't that there was not Besa. It's simply that there wasn't only Besa. And as Dr. Cakrani explained to me, Besa was kind of like the tail end of the communist regime, meaning this. It's the early 90s. Albania opens up, people from Israel start writing in letters. Oh, thank you. We love you. Thank you. You saved our lives. Berat, the commandant, other places, Dores, Florida, other places, other people. But who did this? And the communist government at that time was essentially the same people as it had been under Hoxha, but Hoxha died. And so it's their sons, it's the next generation, it's some of them the same. And it's almost like something like a mobster testimony of like, who did it? Nobody did it. Everybody did it. No names. And that's kind of the approach that was taken. And it's an easy one to accept. And you don't want to challenge someone or embarrass them about it. So you say, okay, it's Besa. But when you give it scrutiny, it's Besa, and it's more than Besa. And it's time to do that and to move beyond just that. Albania's in a very different place now. They're in the UN Security Council. They're in accession talks for the EU. They're a modern democracy in Europe. And Albania has the best record in Europe for the sheltering of Jews. Let's embrace that and let's fix history a bit. There's plenty of revised and whitewashed history from behind the Iron Curtain, and we can fix it.
One of the other questions that just came in is your father or grandfather listed as righteous among the nation?
He's not at this time, but I'll tell you something. Where did I just look up the standard again? The standard is that someone would save Jews, that they would have risked their life to do so, and that they weren't paid to do it. And so we've got that standard. Something that I want to do next is get him that recognition. I think he deserves it, and others who are in the Solomon Museum as well. But I do want to obtain that for him, and I'm in the process of doing that. I'd love to see something we had talked about, Sierra, is all these recorded testimonies that exist, tens of thousands of them around the world, in Israel and at Auschwitz and maybe in LA, that you could search Berat, Commandant, Albania, Sacrany, and what could we find to utilize for that Yad Vashem admission?
Let's see. Last question I'm seeing right now.
Okay.
Or that I have on hand. What do you hope people take away? What do you hope they gain from hearing this story? What do you want to happen next for this?
I'll tell you, when I told you I've been, watching a lot of World War II movies and doing reading as well. And what strikes me about the Holocaust, and I'll lean in, and then honestly I have to back off because it's too much to process. The organized hatred and evil is so mind-boggling. You just cannot get your arms around it. And what I see in this story is organized love and a counter to that. And I think it's so important for the Holocaust community, Holocaust history, Jewish community, all of us who care about the Holocaust, all of us who renounce anti-Semitism, that we all know that there were people who made the right choices and that they also could organize and execute. So I'd like to do his Yad Vashem application formally. I'd like to do a larger program with you guys that involves Albania and World War II history. I'd like to move to a documentary. I think we've got a lot here and that it would present well. And I want to continue to share the story, whatever I could do with your Speakers Bureau and students, and having the story included in a curriculum for all the reasons that it matters. And these issues haven't gone away. I don't have to tell you that. You look at the Ukraine headlines in the news, and you can look at anti-Semitism incidents on any given day. It all matters. It's still with us, and it all matters very much. And so that we get it right, and that we revise a little bit because we know better now, is a good thing. It's what careful leaders with love do.
Such a powerful note to end on. We're thrilled to have you today. Thank you so much. That is all the questions I'm seeing. So I will let you have the final note in this.
Let's see. I guess I should say that it's amazing what's happened in 2 years, and that I could not have done it on my own. And so I thank from the bottom of my heart every person who I talk with, who is so giving and generous and kind, and always looks for a way to find a new platform, always looks for a way to amplify. And I said some of the names throughout. It's Sherry Reig and Dan Shore, the Solomon Museum, Dr. Kaplani, the Auschwitz Museum, Keith Shapiro, son of a gun. Keith Shapiro, an icon of the legal community in Chicago, so important to the JUF community, and I used to work for him. So when I came home, that's actually the first person I emailed. I wrote to Keith Shapiro, and I learned and did not know at the time, is basically one of the key people in the creation of the Illinois Holocaust Museum, and his name's on the wall. And he connected me to you guys, and that has made all the difference. And so the idea is that when you can find people to make common cause with, and notice these people who I'm thanking, some are Jewish, some are not Jewish, some are Albanian, some are not Albanian. People are good and want to help. And that is what I found. And I hope that this story can help people. I think about my grandfather every day. What if he had just made some other choices? What if Albania had not fallen to communism? What if the British sent him some boats and they stayed there, and Albania had been a democracy all this time, instead of going through 50 years of a reign of terror, as they call it now at the National Museum in Albania, a 50-year reign of terror under Enver Hoxha. And what would be different? And that people of good character and people with integrity can inspire us in the smallest ways and the largest ways, and that we all making this common cause together. That's all. Thank you, Sierra. Thank you, everybody.